For this video, I am going to be creating Photoshop brushes out of real-world brush paint messes. So I've created a painting out of black ink, some red acrylic, some watered down paint, some dirty brush splatters, and I brought it into my scanning software, Image Capture, and I've opened up the professional image capture window, and I am looking at creating the brush strokes or the scan as a 300 dpi image. I need the brush strokes or the brushes that I create in Photoshop to be pretty big. I do not want to use low-res files. No, because if I create a very tiny brush with a very low res file, that will mean that if I make the brush large, you will see the pixels. It will look awful. It needs to be a high res image and a nice big file and a nice big selection. So what I've got here is my resolution set at 300. I can set this to a little bit larger or change the size to make these brush strokes a little bit bigger. But I'm going to leave these because it looks like they're going to be plenty big. I'm scanning to my scanned photos. I'm going to name this brush stroke. And I have got my image correction set to none, but I can go in and set the image correction to manual. And I can boost up the brightness or take down the brightness, saturation, etc. And just remember that the brushes are going to be black and white, or they'll be converted to black and white, and this will allow Photoshop to pick up colors that you choose from the swatches panel, so they don't need to be scanned as color images. So this looks like there's some interesting brush, dry brush areas, some nice little drips, etc. in here. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to go ahead and scan it. And then I'm going to go into Photoshop, and as soon as the scan is done, I'm going to open up my file in Photoshop, and I'm going to create a brush. So there goes my scanner. I'm going to navigate to Photoshop, go to File, Open, and go into the folder that I know my brush is in, or my scan is in, and looking for it, I've named it brush stroke, and I'm going to click open, and it's going to open in Photoshop, and you can see that we've got some interesting paint areas, some wet areas, and now I can make brushes out of any part of this image. If I want to, I can delete, I can paint away some of the areas that may be getting in my way. I can make a selection, so if I'd like to make a selection, I can go in with my lasso and make a nice selection of some of the daubs, maybe others I'll leave behind. So hopefully you can see that I've made a marquee selection with my lasso tool. If I go to Edit right now and down to Define Brush Set, it's going, or Define Brush Preset, it's going to show me that I have a 2027 pixel brush selected, and that's my sampled brush. Now you can see that it wasn't pure white in the areas that I've selected, so that might cause me some trouble with this brush. I'm going to leave that one alone, and I'm going to go in and make a adjustment, a levels adjustment on that selection, and I'm going to create a brush out of that selection. So the properties for the levels adjustment, you can see that there is a gap where the levels are supposed to be white. This isn't pure white, this is a little bit gray, so I'm going to boost up in the selection. You can see it turning white in that area. That's awesome. It's actually getting rid of some of the detail, which I'm gonna agree with for now. I'm just gonna leave that alone. I'm gonna make another selection. I'm gonna make another brush. So I'm gonna make a selection. I believe that's fine. Edit, define brush preset. So the problem that is going on right now is that I've got the selection on the levels adjustment, layer and not on the background, but really I want the levels adjustment in the background to mix together. So I have to flatten this file. So I go to Merge Layers, and now Edit, Define Brush Preset will be allowed. Now you may run into this problem. You may run into another problem. Another problem that can occur is that your selection may be bigger than 5,000 pixels. If your selection is bigger than 5,000 pixels wide, Define Brush Preset will be grayed out. In this case, my selection is only 1,700 pixels wide, or almost 1,800 pixels wide, so it's allowing me to make that brush. So I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to go to a file that is ready for painting. So this is just a new file, 8.5 by 11, and I'm going to zoom in here, create a new layer, and go to my brush, select the brush, go into the drop down, and look at the two brushes that I've just created. So I'm going to pick the first one first. Okay, I'll show it to you. It is a 2,000 pixel brush. If I zoom in on it, you can see there's a lot of detail here, but the selection that I made is showing up very clearly. It's picking up paint in the areas that I might not want paint to be picked up. Okay, that's interesting, but maybe not quite as defined as I'd like. So it depends on the kind of selection you make on your artwork when you're turning something into a brush. So this was a simple photograph or a scanned image of some brush strokes. I'm going to throw that layer in the trash and create a new layer. There was no pure white where there would be no paint picked up in that selection. If I go to now the drop-down menu for brushes, and I select the second one that I made, and I'm going to just click and paint with that brush, and just tab out and let you see what that brush stroke looks like. So we've got well-defined areas that this looks like a pretty great brush to me, or a pretty great group of brush strokes. I can use it to define some kind of splatter areas, dripping points, some of that grunge texture. It does have pure white in the selection, so no paint will be picked up. So depending on what kind of color I'd like or what kind of blend mode I want on the brush stroke, it's going to give me a nice brush. You can see I have screen selected, and I'm just using that brush at the same size. If I want to make the brush head or the daub smaller, the bracket key, the left bracket key makes the paint stroke smaller, the right bracket key makes the paint stroke bigger. Tab brings my panels back into view. Tab also brings my panels into non-view in case I need that screen real estate to take a look at what kind of painting is going on, and I don't want to be distracted by all of the panels. And remember, when we go into the brush panel, the brush tip shape area will allow you to rotate your brush. So you can see that I've made the brush stroke rotate. So now the brush stroke is rotating. I can flip horizontally or vertically that brush stroke. I can flip both ways, and you can see the kind of painting that you can do with one brush stroke at the same size. There's a lot of variety here. The spacing, again, as I said in the last video, the spacing is really speaking to when you are painting along a stroke. So if I don't just daub, I let go. So if I go to, I'm tabbing in again, bringing in a smaller amount of spacing, and I'll make that brush a little smaller so you can see it, and go into the layers panel and create a new layer, turn the brush strokes off, and just start painting. You can see the kind of lines that I will be getting when I paint with that brush. So whether I'm painting down or sideways, the brush is going to change how it's painting the paint strokes. So that's a nice intro into creating brushes. We can view our brushes that we create at the very bottom of the Photoshop brush drop-down menu in the control bar, as well as in the brush panel. So the brush panel will show you all of the brushes that you currently have. So my brush is somewhere in here. It's not quite in the same order as the brushes in the drop-down menu, so you can see the brushes that I've just created for these videos are somewhere in the middle to navigate to them. And again, as I said in the last class or in the last video, shape dynamics, scattering, texture, dual brush, color dynamics, all of those options can be added to your brush to make the brush strokes react the way that you want them to, depending on what kind of painting you want to do.